Welcome to Ella Go. My name is Lisa, and this is not just a podcast about running. This is a podcast to empower women through fitness and health and everything in between. Because let's be honest, ladies, this journey could suck if we don't get our shit together. Welcome back, everyone. Today's guest is a holistic wellness blog content creator and yoga teacher, Reiki healer, Helene Kussman. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're going to be talking today about yoga, and then you added that you're a Reiki healer, which, wow, I wish I knew, because I'm going to ask you questions about that, because that's something that I am very interested in. And I know had a Reiki guest, but, I always like to hear different perspectives of it. So, definitely want you to talk about that. But before we go into that, introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about your background story.
I got into yoga and wellness about 8 years ago after I graduated college and moved to DC. I got really interested and I guess first in more of the physical aspects of wellness. So I started running, got really into fitness and exploring fitness studios, and then kind of found yoga for more of the fitness perspective, which I think is pretty common for a lot of yogis, that they get drawn in for the fitness aspects and then stick around and realize the benefits for the mental and just total body healing aspects as well. So I was teaching in a really challenging school and had a lot of anxiety and stress as a first time new teacher. And so yoga really helped me as a good outlet for my stress. And then it also was a great complement for all the other physical activity I was doing and running and all of that. So I'm excited to share more about how it can be hopefully helpful to others who are runners.
So you really did it because of so you said you were a runner.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, were you doing half marathons, or you were just like 5K? I mean, were you, just a casual runner?
Yes, totally casual. So my running journey for the first few years I was one of those runners for a while who was like, well, I run, but I'm not a runner. And now, later in life, and especially as a yoga teacher, I'm like, no, you're a runner no matter what you do in terms of running. You're a yogi no matter what you can do in terms of yoga. You don't have to look a certain way or, do a certain thing. But then a few years in, once we moved to Louisville, which is where I am now, we thought it'd be my husband and I thought it'd be a really fun way to kind of get acclimated to the city to do a half marathon. Then from there got interested in races and did a full and then another half. And then I had my son, and then running kind of went back to square one to kind of where I started, which is now I'm kind of back there right now. And I don't really have any attachments like I used to back when I started. I consider myself a runner, even though I only run a couple miles these days, and just kind of enjoying it through that experience.
I had to ask because when I found out, I think that when we first spoke, initially I reached out to you because you were someone who did yoga. And then when you mentioned the running, that's why I was like, okay, this is perfect, because there are some listeners that are runners. I'm a runner. And we always hear about how great the benefits are with yoga. But before we talk about that, define yoga. I mean, there's Pilates. I feel like people get that mixed up with Pilates, yoga, and then there's so many different variations of yoga. I can't even pronounce some of the names, and I never know what each of them mean. But let's start from square one. What is yoga?
That's a great question. So yoga can be such a broad definition when you look at it, because there's so many types. I like to think about yoga as the connection of breath and movement, and also the connection of mind and body. So there's so many different types of practices, like you've mentioned. Like, it can be confusing. You might not even know how to pronounce them or what they mean, but really just understanding that mind-body connection and breath and movement connection is key.
Okay. And so with those different variations, what what's the difference?
Yeah.
You go to these you go to these studios and you'll see their like little menu of services or of workouts or whatever, or what they provide, and it's all these different days, and I'm like, okay, which one is what?
Yeah, totally. So a lot of places kind of have their own different fun ways that they have, I guess, come up with ways that they do yoga. Like, for example, I have different classes. Like, I have my flow and chill class, but then I also have my flow and sweat class. So you might run into kind of terms like that, but vinyasa is what you'll see a lot for yoga studios. That's probably the most popular thing that you'll see at a lot of studios. And that is, you can expect to see repetition in a sequence of movements where you're really flowing and moving and connecting your breath and movement throughout the practice, versus something like restorative yoga, which I also teach, or more of a yin yoga where you're holding the poses for longer. You're getting more of that deep, slow stretch. There might not be a sequence to it. It might just, besides just those poses in each different pose versus the repetition.
What would you suggest for someone who's like beginners, like does not have never done yoga before? What would be a class that they should start with?
I would suggest to start with an all-level vinyasa class. So you'll see at some studios, they'll actually identify classes that are their all-level class. And what that means is that they're giving a lot of different modifications and options, whereas you can kind of progress through and start as a beginner, and then be kind of, as you become more experienced in the same class, you can be kind of trying things that might be a little bit more challenging. And then if it doesn't say it's an all level class, I would ask the studio or instructor, is this a good class for all levels or for beginners? Because I do think a lot of times it's more about the instructor in the studio, and like the culture, versus a set specific type of class, because I think any type of yoga class could be appropriate for beginners as long as the instructor was providing those modifications in that setting.
Okay. And kind of when you were talking about the different names, the vinyasa, is that how you say it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the other ones that are out there, is it more about the breath work? Is it about the movement, or is it both?
It's both. So that's what's really cool about yoga, is that you are trying to, I guess they both go hand in hand. So when you really go back to the roots of yoga, it's more about the breath and meditation, but then then it evolved to include more of the physical practices to prepare the body for the breath work. And so that's kind of where the more physical practice came in. Now, these days, especially like in Western culture, the way that we've adopted it, it usually starts out that people kind of get into it more for the physical and then start getting into the breath work, but really just both. The connection is so important.
So you said meditation, and so is this a form of meditation, but yet you're moving?
Yeah, for sure. So I think meditation can be different for everyone. I believe that you can have a moving meditation where you are kind of, for me, that can feel very meditative as I'm moving through the class. But for a lot of people, they might say that it's more something where you're still and just focusing on your breath. But yeah, I definitely believe that yoga could be a moving meditation if you're doing more of a physical practice.
I used to do yoga when my daughter was first born, for obvious reasons. Because you become a mother and you're like, and it was so calming. It was so calming. And I remember that I still do. I listen to the radio when I drive to places, and I'll be driving with the radio on, going to the yoga studio. And then when I leave in my car, I don't even have music. It's like silence. It's so crazy. And I'm just like in this The Zen mode, I just love it. But since we're talking about that, what are the benefits of yoga besides calming us?
Yeah, so there's so many wonderful benefits, both the physical and mental aspects. But for physical, I think that there's so many different health issues that I hear it helping people with. Personally, for me, it's helped me with anxiety. It's helped me with my digestion and having some digestive issues. It's helped me with releasing a lot of tension. And then a lot of my clients also say it helps them with a lot of back pain and tension. So there's just so many different benefits, both physically and mentally.
What's the idea behind that? Why is it like, what's the thought behind, or what's happening that when you do yoga, like you just said, that it helps with your gut issues and your back? People said it helped with their back. What's the connection? What's happening when they're doing yoga or doing these poses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you start slowing down and when you start really working on your breath work, then you're tapping into the part of your nervous system that's really starting to calm you down. And especially in a lot of these poses too, they're kind of turning off that fight or flight that we might be in sometimes, and really getting our body into that rest and digest state. And from there, that can help with so many things, with your anxiety, with your digestion, and just so many wonderful benefits, just helping us be in that type of state.
I love that you said that, and you mentioned a lot about the breath work. What is that?
Yeah, so breath work, there's so many different types of breath work. And this is really, I hate to use the word control, but because I think that can have a negative connotation, but just thinking of that, I guess, in a positive way, breath control. So there's different techniques that we can use where we're really thinking about our inhales and exhales and not just making it something that happens without even thinking about it, but something that we're really mindful about. And there's a lot of different ways of doing this that can help you to become more relaxed, have more clarity, feel more balanced, and just tap into all of those wonderful benefits.
So, do you think that everyone can do this type of work, whether, it's the breath work, the yoga poses? I mean, is this for anybody?
This is 100% for anybody. And I think that because of the culture that we live in these days, where we're scrolling through Instagram and seeing all these things in the media, we tend to think of yoga in a certain way. And we really have to let go of all of those images and expectations about yoga and just come to it with an open mind, because in reality, even most yoga teachers aren't necessarily looking the way that you see sometimes displayed in the media, or not even trying to achieve those goals. And it's not really about what you look like or what cool poses you can do. It's about how you feel.
Let's talk about that. So, what is this? What is social media saying about yoga? What is it feeding people?
So I think that there is some wonderful, like, good messages out there with yoga, and it's a great way to access like free content too, just being able to see different poses and things that people are posting on social media. But then just like anything else, whether it's fashion or, makeup and hair, whatever it is, it's like we have to realize that there's people who are doing this because they're doing it for a cool picture or to show something. It doesn't mean that that's what it necessarily always looks like. And that's not a bad thing. It's really cool to get inspired and kind of see that and be intrigued by yoga, but people shouldn't be intimidated by that, because that's not what yoga is all about. And there's no right or wrong or perfect way to do these poses. There's just sometimes more flexible people out there who can do these really cool things, and that's awesome. But just because you can't do that doesn't mean that you can't do yoga.
So I'm going to ask about the body image, because when I think of yoga, and I'm sure a lot of people think of yoga, they think of someone who is very thin, or not very thin, but slender, slender size. And is that an accurate image of someone who is a yoga teacher?
So I think that this is where, kind of circling back to that question about finding a studio with culture in mind, and being beginner friendly. And then also, I think going to a yoga studio where you see yourself reflected. And there are some studios where it can feel very exclusive, or it can feel like, to work there, you have to look a certain way. And those are the classes that you're going to. And when you're in those classes, they might be talking about, um, just like in any other fitness classes, sometimes talking more about body image and burning calories and those things, versus like the studio that I work at, there are all different body types reflected in both the teachers and students. And it's very welcoming. We don't even have mirrors. We don't talk about what we look like. It's really about how you feel. And the owner has very positive body talk, and that's just really the culture at the studio. And that's how all of my classes are too, is it's about how you feel, and it's about letting go of all of those images and just feeling super strong. You'll never hear me talk about burning fat or calories or toning or those things. Not that those are bad, but that's just not what yoga is all about. So that's not the focus or the goal. And those things sometimes do come. We are able to, physically condition our body through yoga, but it's not what we want to be thinking about when we're thinking about the goals.
I want to go to your studio.
Yeah.
So let's talk about well, actually, I just thought of something. Hot yoga. That's another like term that you hear a lot. I don't know if it's a lot now, but I could say maybe about a year, maybe 2 years ago, maybe even three, that was like the word, hot yoga. That was the thing to do. And what exactly, what is it? And how is that different from any other type of yoga?
Yeah, so there's different types of hot yoga. So I guess I don't really want to dive down this rabbit hole too much. People can research on their own, but it became popular with Bikram yoga, which is such a controversy in the yoga world. But then a lot of studios that were Bikram studios distanced themselves from him and from that, and started calling it other things like Hot 26 or things like that. But then there's some that do like hot vinyasa classes where it's not even connected to any sort of similar technique to that. But I think that that's where that became popular initially. And then I think now a lot of people just like it because they really like the sweat or like the detox they feel like they're getting from doing yoga in a heated room. I have had times in my life where I've enjoyed hot yoga. I don't really practice it these days, but I know a lot of people who do. And I think that for some people, they just really like that level of intensity.
And it's basically are you like in a hot room? Like, I think
Yeah,
hot yoga,
you're in literally like a heated room doing yoga. And summer classes are warm. So I've been to some studios where it's warm, so it's not like super hot. But then some places it's like you walk in and it's like, okay, like you're already working up a sweat. You don't even need to start moving. So,
right.
one thing I guess I'll warn beginners about with hot yoga is, I hate the word, well, sorry, I don't want to use the word warm. That sounds scary, but to keep in mind is that when you're in heat and in a hot room, sometimes your muscles, you're able to move into poses more easily. And especially if you're a beginner and you're not sure, like, what your body typically does in yoga, you might want to start, I guess, with a class that's not hot and then try a hot one just to like feel out your body a bit so that you don't overstretch or anything like that in a hot class.
Are you like, well, are you burning, can you burn calories with yoga?
Yeah, so I think depending on like what type of yoga you do, when you do a vinyasa class, especially, and that's the one where you're flowing through that sequence of repetitive movements. There's a lot you can really, depending on the class. Like I offer a class called Flow and Sweat, where you're really working up a sweat and you're doing push-ups and you're doing like all of the things, and I'm just like totally soaked in sweat by the end, and it's not in a hot room. So but then I also offer classes like restorative classes, like my Flow and Chill class, where you in that class you do a strengthening flow at the beginning, but you're not really, it's more slower, and then at the end you're doing these restorative poses with pillows and it's more about releasing the muscles and relaxing. So I think it just depends on the class, but it can definitely be a pretty intense workout depending on the class that you're doing, where you can build a lot of strength.
Okay, that's good to know. What about the benefits for runners? Everyone talks about it. What I know, it's always about the hips because
Yeah.
is it more like the hip work? Because of course we as runners have tight hips.
Yeah, no, hips are a huge benefit. So I guess the more obvious ones are like the stretching benefits and just opening up the hips, and then also calves and hamstrings, like getting all those stretches in. But I guess the ones that you might not think of right away are also releasing tension. Like as runners, we can hold a lot of tension in our back and our shoulders and neck, and that can really get in the way. So yoga can definitely help with like not just actually stretching and releasing that, but then learning techniques for while you're running, like to just have those things in mind that you might do in a yoga class. Like in yoga, I'm always cueing, drop your shoulders away from your ears and like release your tension in your neck. So some of those things can also help. And then the breath, like we mentioned, doing all of that breath work and learning to connect your breath and your movement can be super helpful for running, because breath is just so important, especially if you're training for a race, and just being able to control your breath and all that.
Helene, I never even thought about that. You're right. Like, putting your shoulder, you're so right. I never even thought about that. I always kept thinking it was more of a stretching technique
Mm-hmm.
just to release, our muscles, but I never thought of the movements to do while you're running. That is
Totally.
such a
It's a
great,
big difference.
I just had a light bulb there. So are there any types of positions that you can offer? I mean, I'm sure there's tons of them, but just maybe one or two that you can offer to some of the listeners for runners, that they can use, that they could benefit from, either prior to running or even while they're running.
Yeah. So my favorite stretch for runners, and there's several things you can layer onto it, is lizard pose. It's called. So you can search that pose and see it, if because you're just listening to it if you can't figure out how to do it. But I'll describe it. So when you do the lizard pose, you're going to have both of your hands planted onto the ground, and then one of your legs will be back behind you, and then the other leg you'll have your foot right next to your hand on that same side. And so you're really getting an intense hip stretch in both your hip flexor and then your hip, on the leg where the foot is next to the hand. And then what you can layer on with that, so that's really good for the hips just right there. But then there's a couple things you can layer on. So if you wanted to get a good quad stretch in that same stretch, for the back leg that's straight back, you can actually bend the knee and grab your foot, and then that will give you a really nice quad stretch. And then finally, the last thing that you could layer on that would really help open up your shoulders, which like we're talking about with like kind of that shoulder openness in running, is that when you are grabbing your foot, then you can kind of try to see if you can rotate your shoulder up towards the sky, and then do that whole same thing on the opposite side.
I know exactly what position you're talking about, Helene, and there's no way in hell I'm able to grab that foot. I mean, it
Yeah.
takes time, right?
Oh, for sure. And so that's why it's all about like these layers and like thinking about an all levels class. Like in an all levels class, the teacher would like cue you, maybe just for that first part I was talking about, and you would stay there. And then as you kind of like become more comfortable and your body gets more used to the poses, then there's always like ways that you could intensify it. But even without grabbing your foot, even if you bend your knee in that pose and not even grab it, but just bend your knee slightly, you'll feel a really good quad stretch there.
Okay, that's good to know. So it can be in steps, as you're doing these positions,
Exactly.
baby steps.
Baby steps for sure. Yeah. But that first initial lizard pose is just a great, really good hip opener.
Let's talk a little bit about the Reiki healer. So when did you do this? When did this become something that you were interested in?
Yeah. So So like I mentioned before, I kind of first got into wellness from more of the physical and the fitness and food aspects of it. And then over the past few years, it's kind of led me to explore more of like the mental and the spiritual and the connection of mind, body, spirit. So I went to Thailand a few years ago and I had my first Reiki healing session that was really transformative for me and like a really powerful healing experience. And then I had a couple other times that I experienced Reiki healing after that and just found it to be such a wonderful complement to all of the physical things I was doing. So then when I was getting my yoga training, I decided to also do my Reiki training so that I could use both and complement. So I actually, at the studio that I work at, I do a Reiki and restore session where it is restorative yoga. So like some of those poses I mentioned where it's like that slower practice. And then I also am Reikiing the participants during it so that they're getting that release and all of that relaxation.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, when I had the woman that talked about Reiki, I only had one session. Like I didn't believe it. And I had that one session and I was like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah,
I had an out of body
exactly.
experience.
Totally. It's amazing.
That is amazing that you're doing that at the same time with the yoga. That is huge. That is definitely, I would love to experience something like that. I'll have to look at what they have around here because it's like a double healing session.
For sure. And I actually offer, so the studio that I work at, we are we started during all this COVID stuff offering things virtually, but we're going to continue offering all of our services virtually, even as we've opened back up. So I offer it virtually as well. And the cool thing about Reiki is that it can be offered virtually because all you have to have is that connection with the person, which can be virtual as well, to send that healing energy to them.
That's pretty cool. So let's talk about a little bit before I ask you my last question, just in regards to your business with being a blogger. And I mean, you work for a studio, correct?
Yeah.
And that's in Kentucky?
Yeah, it's here in Louisville, Kentucky. So I both have my own, I offer yoga classes through my website on my own independently and with private clients. And then I also work at the studio here in Louisville and offer group classes and private sessions there as well.
Okay, that's good to know. So I'm going to ask you my last question. What is the one significant improvement you've seen in your life since you started practicing yoga?
So the biggest improvement that I've seen is the connection of mind and body. And that has really kind of helped my wellness overall because it's helped me physically, with my fitness. It's helped me with my personal life, with stress and anxiety. And then it's also even helped me with diet and food, just kind of tapping into my intuition and what feels good to eat. So it's really helped me overall with my wellness, kind of to make that mind-body connection.
I would totally agree with that. So where can people find you? I know you're on Instagram, right?
Yeah, so all of my social media handles are the same. It's my name at Helene Kussman. So HeleneKusman. And I am on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. And then I also am at HeleneKussman.com is my website where I have tons of free healthy recipes, access to my both on-demand and live virtual yoga classes, and blog posts about holistic wellness. So please, if you listen to this and you're interested in any of this, I'm so happy to answer any questions about anything we talked about. So feel free to just contact me any of those ways.
You're a resident yogi, Helene.
Yeah.
All right. I love it. Every time I speak to somebody and it's in regards to whether it's Reiki or yoga, I even had someone with Pilates, you make me want to do it.
Yes, come do it.
Because it's, you talk about the relaxation, and of course, even at a time like this, with the uncertainty, it's definitely something that is needed. So, yeah, I would say definitely go to your page. You have a beautiful page. I went onto your website. You have tons of free information to provide to the listeners. And I will definitely put that on the episode notes. I'll put the links to where they can find you. So, Helene, thank you so much for dropping your knowledge on,
Yes, of course.
on yoga. I really appreciate taking the time out to talk to us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time. Bye.